welcome to our 26th Women in Research session, which is amazing. You can see up there I've got a slide showing already. This is just, we always like to just ask a little question just to get you thinking about the topic to hand, and the topic today is burnout. So it's very easy. You go to slido.com and you enter WinR. Just tell us a little bit about how often you feel emotionally drained from your work, from never up to every day. So I'm just going to leave that on the screen for a minute or so to allow people to do that just while we're waiting for everyone to come into the session. Okay, I think we're ready to kick off. So I am going to get started. So welcome everyone. My name is Professor Sharon Parker, and we are going to talk today about the topic of burnout. It would be wonderful if you can just indicate, this is a typical item in a burnout scale, how often you experience feeling emotionally drained from your work. So that's the little challenge, and then later Annika will share the findings with you. Yes, and Annika is waving. So first of all, everybody, I would like to acknowledge that today we are on the land of the Whadjuk people here in Western Australia, the people of the Noongar Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and feel free to share in the chat which land you are on today. So I am delighted to advise you that today we have a special guest, and our special guest is Dr. Amy Zadow, who I will introduce a little bit later. And she's going to share with us some of the insights, some of the, I have to say, quite disturbing insights that come from a big survey that her and her team have been doing on university staff and their mental health and well-being. I think I don't need to go through the mute your microphones. We do love to see you if you feel willing to share your face. You have the opportunity to share any thoughts or questions in the chat. Feel free to do that. Thank you so much, Sheena, for sharing that you're also on the same country today. We are going to have a little bit of a presentation from Amy and myself. And then, of course, we love to hear from you. We have already lots of questions, so we're looking forward to getting into those. A couple of reminders. First of all, just if you're new to this series, and we have many people, I think, who are new today, we have a website called womeninresearch.org.au, and you will find in there lots of tips, lots of videos of female laureates talking about their experiences and their lives, even surveys actually available for you to try out on that website. And of course, all the prior recordings of these Women in Research webinars. So just want to remind you about that. And I want to just, again, bring to mind, why do we call this the Small Wins seminar? There are lots and lots of big changes that are needed in the area of gender. We know that, women's experiences. But we focus in this series particularly on the power of small change that you might initiate. So this little figure here on the left sort of indicates that, in a sense, what we're aiming for is to be in this manageable growth zone, the orange zone there. So we're not just in the comfort zone, and which is nice, but isn't a state in which you're growing and learning. But we're also not in that overwhelmed zone where we're just too stretched to do anything. And I guess our series is about what are the small changes, the tiny habits that we can take to get ourselves, keep ourselves in that manageable orange zone. And I guess today we're acknowledging that many of us are not always in that zone, and that's the topic of burnout. So I guess this idea of small change is to think about, connect with what is important to you, and then think about what is a small step that you could take to realize what is important to you. And just to give a concrete example, this is a real scenario that I faced recently. Oops, what have I done here? Sorry, I'm doing weird things. So some colleagues and I are writing a book. And, you know, when you do an edited book, you have to write the introduction chapter and you have to write a conclusion chapter. And as the lead author on the book, it was my job to write the introduction chapter, which is sort of an overview of the book. And that, of course, meant I had to read the whole of the book, which I had not had the opportunity to do. And I really wanted to do this task well because people have put their work into this book. In a sense, I see that as trusting that they believe this book is a worthwhile thing to engage in. So I really wanted to do justice to people's chapters, but it also felt really overwhelming. I can't remember how many chapters we have, but there's more than 20. And so I kept procrastinating this task because it just felt too big. So the idea of the small wins is to say, well, what's important to me? It's important to me to do this task well. So I'm not going to just put the chapters into ChatGPT and say, give me a summary, because that wouldn't meet my goal of doing justice to this task. So that was important to remind myself. And then what I basically said is, okay, I'm going to do 2 chapters every day I think I did it for 10 days. And that's what I did. So every day I did 2 chapters, which was a manageable task. And I have to say, and I achieved the goal, but most exciting wasn't just that I wrote the chapter. Most exciting was that I came away going, I think we've got a fantastic book. And I felt really proud of the book that we had put together. And so it was also released a bit of energy for me. It didn't just consume energy, but it actually released some positive energy for me. So I'm going to encourage you all to think about, as we go through the presentation today, what is a small step that you could take to keep yourself in this manageable zone, this orange zone, where you're learning and growing and doing interesting things, but you're not so stretched and overwhelmed that you are, approaching burnout. So that is a reminder of our series and why we initiated it. But without further ado, I'm going to introduce to you Dr. Amy Zadow, who is a lecturer and organisational psychologist. She's actually at the Uni of South Australia and South Australian University, so she's in both. And as you can see from the logo there, she is part of the Psychosocial Climate Global Observatory established there, and she'll tell you a little bit more about that. But we're absolutely delighted to have Amy today as a real deep expert in this topic of burnout, and the opportunity for her to share with you some of the findings from this very large study that she and her colleagues have been doing on us as academics. So over to you, Amy, if you are okay to get going and share your slide.
Definitely. I'll just try and share my slides. So today I'm going to be talking to you about burnout, and I'd just like to acknowledge my work colleagues at the Psychosocial Safety Climate Global Observatory who've been involved in the project that I'm going to showcase to you today. In particular, Professor Maureen, who's the director of the Psychosocial Safety Climate Global Observatory, and also Daniel Nisa and Amy Parkin, who very kindly put together some of the slides that I'll be showing you today. What I'd like to do first is just showcase some of the voices of the participants from the project that we've been working on. We've been working on a project for over 4 years. It's a longitudinal project following university staff across 39 Australian universities. And we've been collecting extensive survey data. But at the end, participants also have the opportunity to provide their own thoughts. And these are some of their own thoughts about the university sector. I'm not going to read them out, but I just wanted to share some of their opinions with you as we progress through the talk. Please let me know if I'm going through them too quickly. Today I'm going to be talking to you about burnout. So burnout's actually been classified in the International Classification of Diseases as a syndrome resulting from chronic workplace stress that's not being successfully managed. And when we're talking about successfully managed, we're not talking about successfully managed by the individual, but successfully managed in terms of the work environment as well. When I'm working with people who are experiencing burnout in practice, we typically see these things. I see these things, and these are well known. You see people who are emotionally exhausted. You can tell just by looking at them that they're feeling that they have no energy. They feel utterly exhausted within themselves. You also see evidence of depersonalization. They become very cynical about their job, the impact that they might have in their job, and even the intentions of others within the work environment. And then finally, you see reduced personal accomplishment. They just can't get the work done that they once could. They just don't feel as efficient as they used to be. Some more quotes from the participants in our research study. So I'd like to talk to you about psychosocial safety climate. Psychosocial safety climate is essentially the climate for the protection of workers' psychological health and safety. And it's really about the infrastructure and system of operation within an organisation that protects the psychological health of workers. It's different to psychological safety. It can get confused, and that's why I think it's important to say up front that there are differences between the two constructs. Psychological safety is about feeling safe to engage in new behaviours or to speak up when you know that something's wrong. Psychosocial safety climate, however, is about the entire infrastructure and system of operation around psychological health and safety in an organisation. So it's much broader than the concept of psychological safety. Being psychologists, we like to measure and quantify and benchmark things. And so the psychosocial safety climate scale has been developed by Professor Maureen, and there's extensive research validating this tool and benchmarking the items in it. And what we have identified is that the psychosocial safety climate tool has 4 specific domains. The first domain measures the management commitment to psychological health in an organisation. How committed to management appear to be when an issue of concern is raised? Does it get addressed immediately, or is it ignored, for example? Organisational communication. What kind of communication practices are there in the organisation around the protection of psychological health and safety? A lot of organisations that we work with talk about this and say, we have really good communication. We're constantly sending out emails to staff telling them what to do. And we would say, but what processes do you have in place for them to voice their concerns to you? And quite often that's where organisations fall down. Management priority. Does the organisation emphasise the psychological health of staff over and above their productivity? And then finally, participation and involvement in issues relating to psychological health and safety as well. So these are the 12 items. We measure these items in organisations and quantify the psychosocial safety climate of each organisation that we work with. From a statistical point of view, we run a lot of statistical modelling around these relationships. And what we typically see is that the psychosocial safety climate, those things that I was talking about earlier that we measure, predict the job demands and the job resources that we see in organisations, and furthermore, the health, including burnout and engagement of employees, and then the outcomes such as absenteeism and job satisfaction. And we can model this and predict things 1, 2, 3, 4 years in advance. And this statistical model is based on the Australian Workplace Barometer, which is a project that Maureen Dollard's been running since 2009. She's been randomly selecting participants, working participants from the Australian population. She has around 7,000 responses so far, and measuring their psychosocial risk over time. And so the wonderful thing about this is that we have longitudinal data, so we can actually look at causes of things, and we can see that PSC precedes demands and resources and subsequent burnout in the statistical modelling that we've been involved in. If you're interested in this research, I have a QR code here. There's lots of resources and links in relation to this area of research. And I'm not going to read these, but just explain that it's been used widely in things like the US Quality of Work Life Survey, the Job Content Questionnaire, etc. One of the interesting things about psychosocial safety climate is that there's been work done to develop benchmarks. So there's academic literature that has demonstrated that you can benchmark total scores of PSC. So if an organisation were to measure the PSC using the items that I've shared before and add them up, they measure them on a scale of 1 to 5, each item from strongly disagree to strongly agree, and then they add them up, they can benchmark where they sit. And what we've identified is an organisation sitting at around 41, they're doing really well. They could improve, but things are in a pretty good state. If the organisation's sort of scoring around 37 or lower, this is a real concern. The staff are at high risk of strain and future impact on their psychological health. And under 26, this is when urgent action is required. Christian Dorman has been involved in a paper that has identified that people who fall into this range are at very high risk of developing a mental health condition. A paper that I've been involved with that has looked at these relationships is this one here that I'm showcasing. And what we did was we randomly selected over 1,000 people from the population, and we screened out anyone who had any symptoms of major depression syndrome to begin with. We were only looking at new cases of major depression. And we found that people who rated their psychosocial safety climate as low at time 1 were 3 times more likely to develop major depression symptoms over a 12-month period. And so that's quite a startling statistic and speaks to the importance of the psychosocial safety climate. Some more quotes. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about the e-stress project that I've been involved with Maureen Dollard at the University of South Australia and Kurt Lushington. And this project's been running since 2019 and has 4 different aspects to it. What I'm going to share with you today is the results of study 2, and that's a survey of university staff across the 39 universities. It's a 4-wave study. We've been undertaking surveys since 2020 and looking at a wide range of aspects of psychosocial risk and health and sleep. And this survey has encompassed the COVID period when people were working from home as well. In fact, COVID hit in 2020 and we were planning to delay the survey because we weren't sure whether it would be able to go ahead. We ended up proceeding with it and we're very glad that we did. And this is the statistical modelling that we use. I don't need to go into a lot of detail about this, but this is the approach that we've used in terms of shaping the survey. And here are some of the results. And the results are pretty startling. I'm just going to step you through them. So We have the university staff results for the psychosocial safety climate in the top box for 2020, 2021, 2022 and 2023. What we would like to see is a psychosocial safety climate of 41 or above, which is the green area. But as you can see here, the results for green are pretty low, and the results for red and orange are extremely high. And if you want to look at the context of that, we have the Australian Workplace Barometer national sample data underneath. And you can see in the Australian Workplace Barometer data that 61.79% of people randomly selected from the Australian population in 2021 were in the green zone for psychosocial safety climate. Look, if you look at 2023 for the university sector, 18.40% of people are in that green zone across Australian universities. So the data collected from these studies is roughly around 2,500 people for the first 2 years, and then roughly around 1,500 for the third wave of data, and then about 1,000 for the final wave. So overall, over 7,000 responses. But as you can see, the data for Australian university staff is pretty concerning. Now I just want to talk to you about women, and I'm comparing women to male data at the moment, just to give you an overview of where women sit in relation to classification level. And as you can see here, women, there is a greater percentage of women in levels A and B in the survey, relatively similar for level C, but then level D and E, there is a greater proportion of men in those categories across the board. If you look at women, levels of emotional exhaustion, and this is an item that we use to measure burnout, you can see that burnout for women is higher for each year level in this survey, and it seems to be increasingly high last year. So it seems to be getting worse. The psychosocial safety climate reported by women is lower in time 4, but generally in the past it has been reported as being higher. Digital demands are reported to be higher for female academics. Emotional demands, here seem to have reduced in 2022. Engagement seems to be decreasing for women. Work-family conflict, as you can see here, appears to be increasing over time. Work pressure is typically reported to be higher by women in academia. Academic pressure is reported to be higher for women. And then when we've looked at unpacking things such as student course evaluations, acquiring grant funding, balancing teaching and research roles, you can see here that women report more difficulty in balancing teaching and research roles and producing academic publications. And women report having worse outcomes for student evaluations. And if you look here, you can see that of the sample of people that we looked at, if you look at the 4th item down, more than 60% of female academics report that they ruminate upon student evaluations of teaching. And then around over 40% say they dread receiving student evaluations of teaching. And here you can see that they report less usefulness of student evaluations typically than male academics. So some of that information I've shared is pretty confronting, but we're going to be having a discussion now about interventions to address some of the things that I've been talking about. And if you're interested in following this research or being involved or measuring psychosocial safety climate in your own organisation, there's a QR code there with all of the links. And you're very welcome to email me as well if you have any further questions in relation to the data that I've just shared.
Thank you so much. Oh, sorry, Amy.
I'll stop sharing.
You've got time. Any? Thank you so much, Amy. I'm absolutely sure people have got questions. So, guys, feel free to make a note of them in the chat, and Annika is going to pick them up later, so we don't lose them. But I think everyone would agree that those are quite stark findings there. So just before we go to Q&A, I just want to address a few of the questions that already have been raised prior that people have sent in, actually. So hopefully you can see my screen there. Can you see my screen? Yes? Annika, yes, thank you.
Yes.
Look, one of the questions, and I won't talk too much about this, was, how do you know if you're burnt out? And I actually think that the measure that Amy just talked about gives you some good insight, because that measures exhaustion. So, that those emotional feelings of fatigue, lack of energy, don't want to get out of bed even, those feelings of cynicism or feeling sometimes resentful, or maybe you might be feeling more angry than you normally feel. And then those feelings of reduced personal accomplishment, which means you sort of feel like you're just not achieving what you need to, and feeling a sort of lack of competence even. So certainly sometimes those feelings are a really good insight into the fact that you might be starting to get burnt out. So certainly be looking at the emotional component. But people are different, and sometimes people experience early symptoms or symptoms of burnout more physically. So just sleeping a lot, or very, very fatigued, or headaches, or nausea, or all of these sorts of things can also, if they're not something you normally experience and you are now experiencing, they could also be symptoms of burnout. And then, of course, there are those behavioural things that we do, and everyone's different. Again, some people will drink too much, some people will eat too much, some people won't eat enough, and so on. So, you know your own self best, but if you are engaging in behaviours that you don't typically do, or you've stopped all your exercise or whatever, these could also be warning signs that you are burnt out. So have a think about that, and it's good to just reflect on that yourself, because if you are feeling burnt out, it's better to address it early, of course. And I've just put there on the slide, we have some resources on the Women in Research website. I've also put there other websites where there are excellent resources around how to manage feelings of burnout, what you can do to cope, and so on. What I just want to talk about a little bit is some guidance from our research around burnout. So we have this framework called the Thrive at Work framework, It's a framework for mental health in the workplace. And we identify these three components. And the first is mitigate. And what that means is if you are experiencing poor mental health, poor well-being, early signs of burnout, you know, what can you do? How can you recognize it? How can you get support and so on? I'm not going to talk a lot about that today. If you go back to our very first webinar, in fact, that is all about that. In that very first webinar, which is on our website, we talk about the importance of self-compassion, you know, as an example strategy of being kind to yourself, and how that self-compassion can help you to feel less burnt out. What I want to focus a little bit more on today, just in the next 5 to 10 minutes, is thinking more about how we prevent burnout from emerging, and how we promote, not just prevent bad things, but also promote good things at work. And so I want to talk a little bit about how we might create high quality work. And I'm going to use one of my models, the SMART work design, which some of you may be familiar with from previous webinars. So what this model is this is a sort of consolidation of 100 years of research of what are the job demands and resources. And Amy mentioned that in her presentation. She said that if you've got this strong psychosocial climate, then you're going to have more job resources and fewer job demands. And this model captures the 4 key job resources that really matter psychologically for people, and also the demands component. So that's what I'm going to use to talk about a few tips for preventing burnout from emerging in the first place. The first thing that I will say is that a lot of the actions that need to be taken to create smarter work, and create those resources and reduce those demands, ideally are coming from the top. So ideally, they are revising our workload models, you know, reducing the precarity of contracts, because when people are on temporary contracts, and we saw that actually in one of the quotes that Amy shared, that because people are on temporary contracts, they often feel like they can't say no to work, or they can't decline opportunities because they don't know if they've got a job in the future. You know, we should be looking at more equal allocation of workload. And that means looking at these big picture things like, you know, even how are universities funded in the first place? We sometimes get some international colleagues on these Women in Research sessions, and there's enormous variation across the world in how university funding models work. And that has a big flow down effect to the quality of work. I'm often quite envious, I have to say, when I talk to some of my colleagues in some European countries who seem to have a lot more tolerable demands, and a lot of it is coming from the way that their universities are funded and structured. So there's these big picture things like that shape the quality of our work. Things like the culture and the resources. If you happen to be in a department which has got a lot of money, that's probably going to have a big impact on the quality of your work, compared to if you're in a discipline or a department which is really resource tight. Promotion systems, what's rewarded, what gets measured, what your leader does. And I'm not going to go through them all, but the point is there are these big factors to shape the quality of our work. I'm going to focus, though, today on what we call the bottom-up factors, because those are things that we can influence. Now, senior leaders can potentially influence some of these more top-down factors, and if you're a leader, hopefully these are things, and I'm sure these are things you're thinking about. But I want to focus today on what we can do as individuals, because that is what is within our sphere of control. So that's what I'm going to share with you next. So let's go to stimulating work. So stimulating work is, you know, as human beings, we have an innate need to grow and learn and develop. So we want work that is meaningful, that's varied, that's challenging, and that's interesting. Now, this, I have to say, is often not a problem for academics because we do have meaningful work. Most of us enjoy the work that we do. But sometimes we can still lose the stimulating component of our work. And I just wanted to share with you my own experience. Sometimes I think I get so overloaded with tasks that I don't get time to do the more interesting components of my job, like the creative components of my job. And I sort of forget what I love about my work sometimes. So I just actually wanted to encourage you to think about, to reflect on, why did you become an academic? What is it that gives you energy and joy in your work? And can you find a way to bring this back in? And I know that that's hard. I'm not saying these are easy solutions, but is there a small way that you can do that? Just as an example, last night, somebody invited me to go to a talk by this guy that's shown there on the left, John Zimmerman, who actually does research and thinking on freedom of speech. And someone invited me to this talk. And look, I never go to other talks, partly because I barely get time to even go to the talks that I'm giving, let alone talks other people are giving. And anyway, I was invited to this talk. And I was reminded that a colleague many years ago had said to me, the greatest joy of universities is the access to the diverse knowledge that we get. And, never forget that. And I thought, well, I have forgotten that completely. I'm in my own little narrow bubble. And so anyway, I decided to go to this talk last night, completely out of, should have been home doing other things, but I went to the talk and it was fantastic and I loved it. And it reminded me, what is the joy in my work? Part of the joy in my work is learning new things, thinking more broadly. So I encourage you to think about that. And if you can't find it in your work, do it outside your work. There's a whole bunch of research by someone called Sabine Sonnentag on what it is that helps you recover from demanding work. And actually, her research shows if you engage in activities in your outside sphere that involve learning and mastery, it might be tennis lessons or music lessons or anything where you are learning new skills, actually it's a great way to recover because you've got to really focus on that and you can't be thinking about your work at the same time. So that's my first recommendation to you, is if you've lost a bit of the joy in your work, think about what you love in your job and see if you can find a way to bring it back in. My second suggestion is about mastery. This is the importance of knowing what it is that we should be doing in our work. What are we responsible for? Are we clear about that? Are we clear how we're doing in terms of feedback? And sometimes it helps to do this whole job. My recommendation here is very simple. I don't think the problem is knowing what to do. I think we're all pretty clear what we need to do. I think it's knowing which thing to do of the millions of things, as in how do we prioritise from the often competing demands that we have in our work. So here my suggestion is simple. If this is something you are really struggling with, maybe consider asking your boss, what is my priority here? I know all these things are important, but what would you, here's my CV, what would you recommend that I focus on? So don't be afraid to ask for more clarity if you are struggling to prioritise the many different things that you are doing. A is for agency or autonomy, and this is the importance of having control in your work, of having influence. I think Amy mentioned the importance of voice. Voice is part of having agency, being able to influence your world. I'm just sharing here a circle. This comes from Stephen Covey, who wrote this book called The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. I actually love this circle. What it shows is that we've got these things that are very much in our control in the middle. we've got these things that that we can influence. That's the orange circle. And then we've got these things that we care about, which are in our circle of concern, but we can't necessarily change them. And some advice that Stephen gives in his book, and I think it's really good advice, is sometimes we spend a lot of time worrying about those things in our circle of concern, but we can't change them, we can't influence them. So it's a lot of energy spent on something we can't change. And what Stephen recommends instead is to say, can we stretch our circle of control and our circle of influences? Is there actually influence that we maybe have that we don't recognize? So in that example I just gave of asking for guidance on priorities, that would be an example of trying to stretch your circle of influence. Maybe it's not just asking your boss what are the priorities, but also trying to encourage your boss to recognize the importance of priorities that are important to you. So you're trying to stretch your circle of influence. So that's A. What can you do to increase control in your work? Because we know that a lack of control is a huge driver of burnout. R is relational. This is the importance in work of connection, support, feeling part of something bigger and teamwork. And I won't say anything more here than, you know, sometimes when we're burnt out, we tend to isolate ourselves or withdraw from people. But perhaps the most important thing is reaching out to people, asking for help, or helping other people can actually also restore energy and connection. And then the big one is T. You know, the biggest driver, and somebody asked, one of our participants asked in the questions beforehand, what is the best control to put in place to reduce burnout? And the best control is to make our demands more tolerable, more manageable. So our workload, our emotional demands, our pressure, our work hours, those are the biggest drivers of burnout. So trying to reduce those things is the most powerful strategy for addressing burnout. And the first thing is increasing the SMAR that I've suggested. They will all help make those demands more tolerable. But we don't have time because we're going to go to questions next. We have done a lot on this topic in Women in Research because it's the biggest topic I think we all face. So we have sessions on saying no, one of our most popular webinars ever. We have sessions on resilience. We have sessions on managing homework, conflicts, and more. And if you go to those sessions, if you haven't seen those ones, there are lots of tips from laureates and others as to how they deal with those things in order to get a better grip on their demands. So I am going to turn us now. That's a little bit of a quick, this is such a big topic. We could literally have a webinar on this every week for a year and we'd still be going. So that's a bit of a quick overview of some ideas, but I hope that stimulated some thinking in your brain. And I'm going to go now to Annika, Annika Mertens, who is a PhD student working with me here at the Centre for Transformative Work Design. And she is going to show us the little poll that, that we did before and also ask some questions on behalf of all of you. So over to you, Annika.
So here we can see the results of the very first question on your first slide. So yeah, people feeling emotionally drained. Most of the people said a few times a week, then a few times a month, or even every day. There are some people also who just say a few times a year, which is like promising. At least not everyone's feeling super stressed all the time, but the picture is quite clear, I would say, sadly. But coming to the questions you already, there are so many questions in the chat, we won't be able to address all of them, but thanks everyone for being so participative and asking that many questions. So the first one that I would have for you, Amy, is there anything, because Sharon already said the thing that we can try to prevent is tolerable demands, having like demands we can deal with. Is there anything else from your side where you say this is something we can do to actually prevent burnout from happening?
Well, one of the things, I mean, there's a few things, but one of the things that one university is doing that we're currently working with is making the psychosocial safety climate a KPI. And they're at the very early stages of that, but that puts pressure upwards on sort of management systems to develop tolerable work demands, secure work, well-resourced jobs. So we're watching this particular university with interest. We're hoping to do an evaluation and collaborate with them, and we'll see what kind of achievements they can make in that space. Alternatively, we've been involved with departments in universities who have decided that they have concerns and that they want to do something themselves, and so they have been involved in setting up their own surveys, action plans, evaluations, processes to try and improve the systems within the work environment. And that that seems to be progressing. We'll see how that goes. Some of these issues are really big. I mean, they're systems issues, they're political issues, and I know that Maureen Dollard is very keen to make this information widely available and to start meeting with people, politicians, people at Universities Australia and other people to shine a light on these results, because she feels very passionately that something needs to change.
And there is legislation, well, there has been for a long time, but there's now clarity in the legislation in health and safety that employers have a duty of care to prevent the sort of harm, I guess, that we are seeing many people experience. And that I mean, legislation is a blunt instrument, but it does actually create a motivation. And so there is more interest in the sector from senior people to address these issues. What we've got to watch out for is, and somebody made a comment about it, we've got to make sure that it's not just, yoga and fruit bowls, as our ex-chief mental health commissioner, Lucy Bodkin, says, and actually make sure it's addressing these things that we all know are really important, like workload models, bureaucracy. Curtin, for example, has a bureaucracy busting program. These are the sorts of things that universities can do. And there are universities working on these things. Of course, we would all agree they need to go harder and faster. Yeah, but good question. Thank you, Annika.
Yes. Then there were some people who were interested in, is burnout actually contagious? Like, can that spill over, especially in terms of competition about who's the busiest, who's more stressed, who's putting more effort into things? Yeah, do you have any insights on that?
So this is a really interesting one, the idea of burnout being contagious, and certainly with our multi-level statistical models, we often see shared perceptions of PSC. So we see that groups have similar perceptions of the psychosocial safety climate, but not so much of the work demands and not so much of burnout, of emotional exhaustion. So you don't necessarily, we run statistical models, we calculate ICCs to look at shared perceptions across groups, and we don't often, we don't see the same level of consistency for burnout. So there is some variability in experiences of burnout within teams. We do see really strong, consistency in perceptions of PSC, which is interesting.
Yeah. No, that's good to know that it's not necessarily contagious and that you can have different perceptions of the same workload. But is there any way how we can shift like such a culture of overwork and such a culture of competition?
I've got, Sharon, are you happy for me to, sorry, I don't want to buy.
Go for it, absolutely.
I think it's really, really critical that we move away from this focus on work and productivity, and we start prioritising psychological health in organisations. We need to do it. All the research evidence shows that people who feel that their psychological health is supported are more productive, are more satisfied, less likely to leave. So the statistics show the enormous benefits of having a psychologically healthy organisation. And with the new regulations that Sharon mentioned, there should be more focus on this than ever, because now there's a responsibility for organisations to follow through and ensure that people are working in psychosocially healthy work environments. So times are changing. It'll be very interesting to see how this impacts university staff and women in particular. But I'm really hopeful that there'll be a much greater emphasis on these issues in the future. And another thing we're going to do is we'll be sharing the report, the database interactively, so that people can actually work with it. They can see it. We're being very transparent about it, so they can see everything in it. They can pick out particular groups and look at how they're performing compared to other groups. And the idea then is that if we provide this data to all participants and have it on a website, then everyone can see it. And we're hoping that it will draw attention to this issue. So that's another thing that we're really hoping might create change in this sector.
Yeah, I guess I would just add to that, in a sense. I think what we're talking about is there's those top-down big things that we need to do. There's things that we need to do if we are leaders or even colleagues in organisations, around helping people to manage workloads and so on. And then, of course, there are things that we can do as individuals. And I can see a comment there that, it's not about putting all the responsibility on individuals. I think we absolutely agree with that. But we also need to look after ourselves too. So we need those multiple levels of strategies. But things like role modelling are important too, I think, as leaders, trying to role model the right behaviour, or not the right behaviours, but role model saying no, those sorts of things that turn out to be really important, or helping our younger faculty to navigate. Is this a good, I get a lot of people come to me and say, should I say yes to this? And we will talk through, like, well, here's the pros, here's the cons. And, sometimes my advice is say no. And sometimes my advice is say yes, but having the space to be able to have those conversations, I think, is important. And that's where I go back to ask for help if you're not getting it.
Yeah, thank you, Sharon, also for your insight. I don't know whether you have any information on that, Amy, but there were people asking about how effective are actually mental health days or longer leave periods, addressing also the issue that the workload or overload is often the problem, and really often there are well-being programs that are being implemented, but they don't really seem to help. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, there's been a lot of interest in the 4-day working week, for example. And mental health days is just sort of another form of that. It's always beneficial to take a break from work, in particularly if your recovery is of high quality in nature. If you're doing things like relaxing with friends or spending time in nature or exercising, then these are really healthy things to do as part of recovery from work. The problem is that if you return to an environment where there is high workload, unsustainable workload, low priority of psychological health, then you're going to continue the cycle of feeling burnt out. My colleagues have done some research with EAPs, and what they found is that someone can go and see an EAP, and the EAP can manage levels of psychological distress, and that person may return to the workplace and feel better. But if they return to a work environment that has work demands managed, has a high PSC, then their recovery is going to be much, much more improved. So, more broadly, it's really important to focus on work design, on healthy workplaces, on the psychosocial safety climate, to manage these things, rather than just having, a mental health day here and there. Well, that's my opinion anyway.
Oh, no, I think that's a great comment, Amy. And I just would like to acknowledge that we do have professional staff here too, and someone's just made a comment to that effect. And we see those same issues amongst professional staff of, ridiculous levels of workload. I see it all the time with our research people and many others. So definitely this is not something that academics uniquely experience. Just on the leave thing, there is some very fascinating research around the impact of having holidays, right? So unfortunately, the health benefits of holidays don't last very long. And I think we've all experienced this, where you come back after 2 weeks break or something like that, and within half a day, you're already pretty exhausted again. What that research actually shows is the importance of daily recovery. So yes, it's great to have holidays and have those long periods of leave, but what's really important is the daily recovery. So, the detachment from work that I mentioned before, some activities that you might do out of work. And I saw a great comment from someone about playing netball and how that really means that she completely switches off from kids and work, So thinking a little bit more about what can we do on a daily basis, I think is really important as well. And, whether it's a 10-minute walk outside, if that's all you can do, but something on a daily basis.
Yes, thank you so much for your insights. We're 2 minutes before 12. Do we have time for another question, Sharon, or would you like to wrap it up?
Sneak in one super quick one that Amy can answer.
Well, one question was like maybe a personal example of what you do, Amy. Just what Sharon also just mentioned, something that you can do on a daily basis.
Yeah, so this is an interesting one, because I was just saying to Sharon before we went on that I was up till 3 a.m. working on a promotion application on Sunday night. So I don't always, I can't always manage the workload within working hours, as a lot of academics I know, are in the same boat. However, what I do have, and what I'm very lucky to have is I have pretty good support and boundaries. Typically at home, and I have a huge amount of social support from female leaders who inspire me, and they've really kept me going all these years. Maureen, Anna Johansson. I've always had a lot of women who supported and encouraged my work, and I think that's really helped everything that I've been able to achieve, and I feel very lucky and grateful that I've had that.
Well, thank you, Amy. I think that's a lovely note to end on. And once again, the importance of women helping each other. And we often return to that theme here in our sessions. So thank you so much for all the wonderful participation in the chat. There's been so many great conversations happening. Thank you, Amy. It was absolutely fantastic to get that bigger picture insight, as well as your tips and ideas. Thank you, Annika. Thank you to the people behind the scenes, Isabel and Eleanor and others. And finally, of course, thank you everyone so much. Think about a small win, one small thing you could do as a result of today. And we look forward to seeing you again at our next Women in Research in about 1 month. So thank you all for joining.
Thank you, Sharon. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.